So you're getting ready to take your driver's permit test. Maybe you're a teenager ready to get your driver's license for the first time. Maybe you've had a driver's license in the past and you need to take the written test in order to get your license reinstated. Maybe you received a letter in the mail from the DMV for whatever reason stating that you need to retake the written test in order to renew your driver's license. So you've opened up your rules of the road book from your state, looked at those pages and thought, do I really need to memorize all this? The good news is you don't have to memorize everything word for word in that book. But there are certain things you absolutely need to understand before you sit down for that written test. And that's what we're going to cover today in this video so you can be more confident when you visit the DMV or enter that driver's education class at high school to take that written test. Hello everybody and welcome to the Driver Trainer channel. I'm so glad you can join me for this exciting video as school is about to start and many teenagers are about to enroll in driver's education class in a couple of weeks. Maybe some of you have already started school by the time this video is released. But nevertheless, in order to get that learner's permit, you will need to take a written test. And in order to take that written test, you need to understand what's in that booklet. So my goal in this video is not to cover the entire rules of the road book. I'm going to disseminate videos at a later time where we go through the whole rules of the road book. And they will not be part of my weekly video series, but they're going to be more reference video that are going to be categorized for anyone who wants to view them at any time. What I'm going to do today is go through the basic rules of the road, go through the traffic signs, go through right-of-way laws, go through pavement markings, speed limit signage, parking, passing, safe driving practices, and some of the questions that commonly give new drivers trouble when they take the written test or when they finally get their license and get out on the road. Now, one important disclaimer before we get started is that driving laws are not exactly the same in every state. So you do need to read your book from your particular state. And there are some things in this video that I will point out that may differ from state to state that I will try to point out as much as possible. So this video is designed to teach you the common concepts that appear on all learner's permit exams across the U.S. And nevertheless, you should always study your state official's driver's manual as well as reading through it for specific laws, restrictions, and requirements wherever you live. So think of this video more as a permit test crash course video. So let's get started. And by the way, this is going to be a lengthy video, so stay with me. And if you already have your driver's license, I would encourage you to stay with me on this video because this might be a refresher to many people. Let's start with knowing the basic rules. Before we get into signs and intersections and all that other good stuff, let's establish something important. Driving is not just simply knowing about how to operate a vehicle, steer a vehicle, accelerate it, and hit the brake pedal when needed. There's more to it than that. Driving is all about understanding the rules that determine who goes, who waits, where you can drive, and what you are allowed to do. And that's exactly what the written exam is all about. And that's what you are being tested by the DMV. Because the DMV wants to know certain things, such as, do you understand the street signs? Do you understand traffic signals? Do you know who has the right-of-way? Do you know how to safely change lanes? Do you know when you can pass? And do you understand what you're supposed to do when something unexpected happens? These are concepts that you will need to focus on. Now let's look at traffic signs. Now this is one of the easiest areas to study because signs generally use colors, shapes, and symbols to communicate information. Now if you open your rules of the road book and you go to the section about street signs, it'll go through colors and shapes, and you want to focus on those because a part of your written exam will include matching colors to identify what sign is what color is what, and what shape is what. Now, I'm not going to go through all that in detail, but I'm going to cover the basics. But I do want you to read through that section because it's not a very difficult section to read through. It's very easy to understand, very basic, but I'm going to cover the basics for today. I want to start with the stop sign. All stop signs are universal octagon shape, which means it's 8-sided. And it's always going to be red with white letters that say stop. And here's something really important for the test. A stop sign does not mean slow down. It does not mean roll through if nobody is coming. It means you must come to a complete stop at the required stopping point. And stopping means all motion ceases. In other words, the speedometer goes down to 0, and once you stop, you feel that kickback because of physics doing its job of contradicting motion. That's a complete stop. So if there's a stop line or a stop bar, as it's known, you want to stop before that solid white line. If there's a crosswalk but no stop bar, you want to stop before your vehicle even touches the crosswalk. And if neither is present, you just want to stop right before the fixated stop sign post, then pull forward as necessary for optimal visibility. Let's talk about the yield sign. A yield sign will be a triangular sign with the point facing downward. That's a yield sign. It will have the letters yield in the middle of it. It'll have a thick red border with a white triangle in the center. Now, a yield sign does not mean you have to come to a complete stop, but you do have to yield the right-of-way to other drivers. So picture it as a stop sign as far as the right-of-way law, but you do not need to come to a complete stop in order to proceed. Whereas a stop sign, you would need to come to a complete stop. Yield sign, you can roll through as long as there's nobody to yield the right-of-way to. Well, let's talk about warning signs. The yellow diamond-shaped signs are generally warning signs. They warn you that something is coming up, such as a curve, maybe a hill, maybe a merging lane, maybe a pedestrian crossing, maybe a railroad crossing, and those will always be round instead of diamond shape, a slippery roadway, or maybe a no passing zone sign, which will always be posted on the opposite side of traffic, and that will be a pendant shaped sign. The most important thing is not just recognizing the sign, it's understanding what the sign is telling you to do. So basically, to sum it up, it's telling you to prepare for the hazards and adjust your driving accordingly. Now let's talk about regulatory signs. Regulatory signs generally tell you what you must do or must not do or may not do. These signs will be white in color. Also, if the sign is written in black font, that generally is a requirement that you must meet or are permitted to do, such as a speed limit sign or a pass with care sign. If the font is red, that usually indicates a prohibition, such as a no parking sign. Examples include speed limit signs, no passing or pass with care sign. I know the no passing sign is always in black font instead of red, although you're going to see the no passing zone sign in the yellow pendant more than you will see the white with black font. Also, the one-way sign or the do not enter sign, which usually will be red with a big thick hyphen in the middle that says do not enter. No parking sign, keep right sign. And these aren't suggestions, these are traffic regulations. Now let's talk about school zone signs. Now school zone signs you're going to see around school zones. You may see a school zone ahead sign. These signs are designed to warn you about pedestrians, usually of a younger age, and that a school is about to be present that you're coming up to. A lot of the signs may be yellow, or the speed limit signs will have the white with yellow border. Now this particular shade of yellow will generally be like a limeish green yellow, although the older signs are yellow like the warning signs. So you want to be mindful of those signs, as that will be a school zone, so you'll be seeing an influx of pedestrians in these particular zones. Let's talk about construction zone sign. Construction zone signs will typically be orange, and that means you're coming up to a construction zone. So when you see orange signs, maybe barrels, cones, or barricades, you want to pay close attention because the roadway may not be operating the way that it normally does, especially with workers present, lanes being changed around in a different formation, maybe a reduced speed limit, and changing roadway conditions. All right, let's talk about traffic lights. Now this sounds simple, but permit tests love traffic light questions. So you want to be mindful of such questions on the written exam. Red light obviously means stop. Now, unless a sign is posted, you are allowed to turn right on red after you come to a complete stop. And also you may turn left on red from a one-way to a one-way. And this is after you come to a complete stop and yield to anyone who has a right-of-way, such as traffic or pedestrians. Then you may fully proceed. But don't automatically assume you can turn, because you do need to look for that no turn on red sign, a yellow light. Now, the common question might be to a lot of people is, what does a yellow light mean? A yellow light generally means the signal is changing from green to red and you should prepare to stop. It does not mean speed up, you've got 3 seconds. No, it means if you can safely stop, you should be stopping. Now, green light. This might be a trick question that may fool people on the exam, especially if it's a multiple choice exam and you find green light means we may go. This is where you need to read the questions carefully. A green light means you may proceed when the intersection is clear and it is safe to do so. And that's an important point, because a green light does not give you permission to drive into an intersection that you cannot clear, and you still must watch for vehicles, pedestrians, and other hazards. So in other words, if the light is green and pedestrians are trying to finish crossing, especially handicap or elderly pedestrians, you need to let them finish crossing out of your path of travel before you proceed through a green light. Or vehicles may be stopped up ahead, you would need to wait behind the stop bar, because otherwise you'll be in the intersection, and if the light turns red and it doesn't clear, then you'll be blocking the intersection. Those are something to keep in mind, as well as look for on a written exam. Now let's talk about flashing signals, because the red, yellow, and green lights I just talked about are based on solid signals. Now, instead of any traffic lights being solid, you may see lights flash. Maybe that's at a traffic light at an intersection, or it could be other random lights that are mounted above certain street signs or at intersections. Now, a flashing red light is the same as a stop sign, so you would follow the rules according to a stop sign. A flashing yellow just means a warning, means slow down and proceed with caution. I know some traffic lights late at night will go into a low volume mode, meaning one side will flash red, the other side will flash yellow, like such as shopping centers and so forth. That doesn't mean you can just blow through. Everything is safe. You still want to check, just like you would do if the light is green. You do want to slow down just a tad and make sure no one's going to run the red light. In the same way with the flashing yellow, it just gives you caution. You may see yellow flashing lights posted above, say, a stop ahead sign, or at an intersection where collisions are known to be prevalent. Your local public works might put in that flashing yellow to let you know, hey, there's an intersection, just be on the lookout. And that's what those flashing signals mean. All right, moving on. Let's talk about right-of-way laws. Now, the right-of-way laws is one of the most important subjects on a permit test. And here's the biggest thing to remember. Having the right-of-way does not mean you have the right to cause a collision. Now, whether that question is on there word for word or not, they may have some other questions that basically go back to this point that having the right-of-way does not mean you have the right to cause a collision, because you can have the right-of-way and still be required to avoid a crash. Let's talk about four-way stops. At a four-way stop, vehicles generally proceed in the order in which they arrive. Now, if two vehicles arrive at the exact same time, then the vehicle on the right generally has the right-of-way. Now, this would be a situation where two vehicles are going different directions, but they're going to cross paths no matter which way they go. Now, let's say you have an oncoming car. Typically, you wouldn't have to yield because you're both going opposite directions on the same roadway, so then therefore you're just going to pass each other like you would if you're driving down the road against oncoming traffic. Now, however, if one is turning left while the other is going straight, and you both stop at the same time, then the person who's going straight would have the right-of-way. And I want to point out one more thing. This might be on a written test. A lot of people don't always understand this, but if you have 3 or more people that approach, most people think it's 1, 2, 3, and so forth. First come, first serve, second come, second serve, third come, third serve. That is not quite the law. If you read the rules of the road book, and I haven't looked at this closely lately, but I've known it's been in the older versions for many years, this can be a trick. So pay special attention to this, everybody. If you have a 3-way situation, not a 3-way tie, But a three-way situation where three people show up at the same time, it's going to be first come, first serve. Then after that, it will be the person on the right who has the right of way between the second and third person. So be very mindful of that on the written test, because if you answer it as first, second, third, you'll most likely get that wrong. In fact, I guarantee you will get that wrong. But here's where people can get confused on a written test. Don't simply memorize the car on the right always goes. That's not the whole rule, like I explained, because you have to consider who arrived first and what each driver is doing. Now, at an intersection, whether there's a crosswalk or not, pedestrians always have the right of way at many crossings. So for instance, if you're at a stop sign, that pedestrian always goes regardless of who stopped first and has the right to proceed out in front of you to cross the road. If you're driving down the road, there's no stop sign or anything, but there is a crosswalk present. The pedestrian has a right to make that crossing, and you are required to yield for that pedestrian. And that's regardless of whether there are signs or not. And don't forget about pedestrians who may be difficult to see. That may be children or people who are wheelchair bound, maybe people walking at night, and people crossing at intersections. And always be prepared for someone to enter your path unexpectedly. All right, let's talk about lane markings. Here's an easy way to remember the basic distinction. Yellow generally separates traffic moving in the opposite direction. White generally separates lanes moving in the same direction. So for example, on a two-lane roadway, you'll see a yellow line that's usually right at the center of the road. And then white lines will separate lanes traveling in the same direction. Now let's talk about the difference between solid and broken lines. A broken white line generally means you can cross it when it's safe and legal to do so, whereas a solid white line means crossing may be restricted or discouraged. Typically you'll see a double solid yellow line, which generally means passing is prohibited across that line on both directions. Let's talk about speed and following distance. Speed limits are another major part of the written test. And here's something new drivers will sometimes misunderstand. The posted speed limit is generally the maximum legal speed under normal conditions. In other words, you have dry pavement, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping, everything is great. Those are normal conditions. It does not mean you must drive the speed limit regardless of conditions, because if it's rainy, snowy, icy, foggy, or traffic is heavy, you might need to drive slower. Now keep in mind, when everybody's driving 20 over the speed limit, that does not warrant conditions to require a higher speed. No, never, ever, ever will that ever be the case. Anyone who follows that mentality falls into the risk of getting a citation. Just because there's too many people to issue a ticket doesn't mean that officer is going to find at least one person to write a ticket to. Because if there's 50 people on the roadway doing 20 over the speed limit, you're out there doing the speed limit, you won't be 1 out of 51 to get that ticket. The other people will be 1 out of 50 to get that ticket. Of course, just make sure you're in the right-hand lane, so you don't risk getting a ticket for a left or center lane violation if it's a limited access expressway. Following distance. You also need to know about following distance, because you don't simply want to just stare at the bumper of the vehicle in front of you. What you do is you choose a fixed object ahead. So for instance, you come to a fixated sign. So for instance, you discover a fixated sign along the roadway. The vehicle in front of you passes that object. You begin counting. 1, 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, and so forth until you reach that sign, and however many seconds it takes for you to approach the sign that your eyes were focused on, that's your following distance. And remember, the worse the conditions, the more space you may need. Now let's talk about lane changes and turning. Before you lane change, you need to do several things. First off, you need to put your turn signal on. Then you need to check your mirrors as well as your blind spots to make sure the lane is clear. Then move smoothly into the lane. And don't just rely exclusively on your mirrors, because mirrors don't always show you everything around your vehicle. That's where this infamous phrase comes into play. Check your blind spots. A blind spot is an area around your vehicle that may or may not be visible in your mirrors. And before you move into another lane, you need to make sure that that area is clear. Right. Turn signals. Always use your turn signal whenever required to communicate your intentions. And here's a driver trainer tip. Don't use your turn signal because you think it gives you permission to move. A turn signal tells others of what you intend to do. It doesn't give you the right to move into an occupied lane and whack them right off the roadway. You want to signal first, then make sure the movement is safe, and also you want to memorize turn signal distances, as these questions might be on the written test. And that is, you need to signal 100 feet before you turn in a city or urban area. You need to signal 200 feet before you turn in a rural area, and you signal 2 seconds prior to making any lane changes. All right, let's talk about passing on roadways. Primarily on a 2-lane roadway. Passing questions are common on the permit exams. Before you pass another vehicle, you need to determine whether passing is legal and safe. So you want to look for those no passing zone signs. You want to look for the center lines if they're solid or broken. You want to look for oncoming traffic to make sure you don't have a head-on collision with an oncoming vehicle if you try to make a pass. You need to look for hills and curves. And you also need to look for intersections. You also need to look for railroad crossings, as well as any other hazards that might be out there. Now, you don't just pass simply because you're impatient. And remember, you are responsible for making sure the entire passing maneuver can be completed safely. Now, keep in mind, if you can't see far enough ahead to know what's going on, don't make the pass. Let's talk about parking. Parking questions can be surprisingly specific. You need to know where parking is prohibited or restricted. For instance, near fire hydrants, in front of driveways, on sidewalks, in the crosswalk, near intersections, near railroad crossings, in front of certain signs or traffic control devices, and in spaces designated for people with disabilities, unless you are properly authorized to use them. And your state manual will give you the exact distances and restrictions of how far you must park away from these particular objects. And these numbers are worth memorizing because they can absolutely appear on the test. Now let's talk about school buses and emergency vehicles. And this is one area you definitely need to know. So when a school bus activates its required warning lights, those are the amber warning lights, drivers may be required to stop. And that exact circumstance can depend on the roadway and state law. So for example, a divided highway may have different requirements than a 2-lane roadway. So don't memorize a blanket rule that applies everywhere. Know your state's law, because some states it typically comes down to 4-lane divided roadways. Some states will only let you pass a school bus on the opposite side of a roadway if it's a divided 4-lane roadway, while other states will let you pass on the opposite side of any 4-lane roadway. So you need to know your state-specific law for your state test. And I do have a video on school bus safety that I did drop last week, and I'll pin that in the comments here on this video if you want to go back and watch that video. That will give you all the breakdown of school bus regulations and school zone regulations that everyone needs to know when traveling in such areas and traveling around a school bus. So the basic principle is simple. When the school bus is stopped to load or unload children, you need to slow down, pay attention, and know when you are legally required to stop. Emergency vehicles. If there's an emergency vehicle approaching using warning lights, you need to yield and allow it to pass. That means pulling over, or basically you need to be stopping if all possible, or making every attempt to stop. Now sometimes you may see the emergency vehicle, you're about to stop and he already passes, then you can keep going, obviously, because now he's long gone. So you need to make every attempt to stop as best as possible. And don't forget about emergency vehicles stopped on the side of the road. Many states have what's called move over or slow down laws, requiring drivers to move over when possible or slow down when passing certain stopped emergency or service vehicles. Now, many states are going to what's called move over and slow down for first responder vehicles. That's usually when the lights are red and or blue. Usually red and blue, some are red. Most of the time they're red and blue. That would be your police vehicle, your fire truck, or your ambulance. And many states are going to this move over and slow down, meaning you need to slow down regardless and move over if it's safe to do so. I'm not sure what state was the first state to do that. I want to say it was Illinois, because we have had this law on our books for many years, and we call it Scott's Law. And then after an incident back in 2019, 2020, we had a state trooper not far from where I live that was killed by another truck as she was conducting a DOT inspection on the side of the road on another semi. And sad to say, she was unalived in this incident. And after that, our state strengthened our Scott's Law regulations, and then other states started to follow suit and started to go to the move over and slow down model. Now, for the written test, you need to know what your state law is, if your state is a move over or slow down state, or if it's a move over and slow down state. Be very mindful of that, because that might be a question on the written exam. You don't want to get that one wrong. And if you're driving down the road, if you're in another state and you don't know the exact law, just assume it's a move over and slow down state. Now let's talk about pedestrians, bicycles, and motorcyclists, because these tend to be the smaller objects out on the roadway compared to a car. Because a driver's responsibility isn't just about watching other cars, you also need to watch for these smaller objects, the pedestrians, bicycles, and motorcycles. Now let's talk about bicycles. A bicycle is considered a vehicle in many situations, and bicyclists have legal rights and responsibilities. In fact, the bicycles on a roadway follow the same laws to an extent as a motor vehicle. So you always want to give bicycles appropriate space when passing. In fact, if you're passing down a roadway and a bicycle is out on the right of the shoulder, the law that you want to remember, if this question is on the exam, is that you give them 3 feet of space minimum. And don't always assume they're going to stay at the edge of the roadway or on the correct side of the road. It's very common for bicyclists to be riding on the opposite side of the road, despite the fact that it is illegal in pretty much every state to be on the opposite side of the roadway. And I will be dropping a video pretty soon here about bicycle regulations, so stay tuned for that. Let's talk about motorcycles. See, motorcycles are smaller than passenger vehicles, obviously, because they only ride on 2 wheels. Maybe you have a trike with 3 wheels, but nevertheless, the footprint on the road is much smaller than the footprint of a 4-wheel automobile. And with that said, they can be harder to see, and their speed and distance can be more difficult to judge. Especially with the weight of a motorcycle, it's a lot easier to get up to speed without a lot of horsepower, and very easy to stop compared to a 4-wheel automobile. So never assume that because you don't see a motorcycle out there that there isn't one. And then for pedestrians, remember, a pedestrian can appear in your path very quick, especially around schools, shopping centers, residential neighborhoods, or even parking lots. So you want to be scanning ahead and look beyond the vehicle immediately in front of you, and always be prepared for the unexpected. All right, distracted driving. Let's talk about something that is especially important for new drivers, because your phone is not more important than the road. As far as your texting and typing and reading your messages or scrolling through social media, watching videos, maybe of a shark that's about to attack somebody, like that TV commercial where it's about to go on the attack, then the video moves from the shark to the guy watching the shark video on his phone, and all of a sudden he looks right, he's looking down on his phone like this. All of a sudden, eyes perk, brakes are slammed like that because there's a pedestrian that he almost hits. With that all said, all these activities can take your attention away from the road, and many states have special restrictions for young drivers when it comes to utilizing their devices. So you want to be up on your laws for age restrictions as far as device usage, especially if you are in a state that prohibits even a hands-free device to be used until a certain age. So the safest habit is very simple. Put the phone away before you start driving. If you need to make a phone call or use navigation, get all that set up before you start moving your vehicle. Because whenever you're driving, your job is driving. And if you're ever asked on a written exam how many times you are allowed to press anything on your phone, typically the law is one touch. That means one touch to answer the phone call or something like that, with a hands-free device, of course. So be prepared if a question does appear on a written test like that, because I could see the question with answers 0, 1, 2, 3, or whatever sequence they want to throw on there. Then you answer 0 and you get it wrong. You're like, what? Yeah, because it's typically one touch. So I just want to prepare you for that one if that appears on any of your exams. All right, let's talk about alcohol and impaired driving. This is another subject you should expect to see on the permit test. In fact, I can almost guarantee you there will be questions regarding impaired driving and alcohol and drugs and all that other not so good stuff. One thing to keep in mind, alcohol and driving don't mix. Neither do recreational drugs or illegal drugs, or even medications that are prescribed to you or over the counter that can impair your ability to drive. And for drivers under the legal drinking age, many states have what's called a zero tolerance law. That means your blood alcohol control level must read 0.00000. Outside of that, the BAC, or blood alcohol control level, for any other driver will be 0.08. That's a number you want to memorize, because I can almost guarantee you that will be on a written exam. And as far as the zero tolerance law, you need to know that for your state, because if your state has a zero tolerance under 21 blood alcohol control level, I can almost guarantee you that will be on your state exam. And here's the important thing to remember. You don't need to be falling down drunk to be too impaired to drive. And I'm sure you've seen the videos or the episodes of OP Live or other police following shows where police do a sobriety test on somebody and they're just falling down to the point they can't even do the test. And then they have to pick them up as they put handcuffs on them and throw them in the back of the squad car and probably take them to the hospital to get sobered up. But however, you don't have to be in that category to be too impaired to drive. If a substance affects your judgment, coordination, reaction time, or ability to safely operate the vehicle, you shouldn't be driving. The safest choice is to always have a sober driver. And you will want to read the chapter regarding impaired driving more carefully. As like I said, I can guarantee you the written test will cover questions regarding impaired driving. And remember the 0.08 blood alcohol control number, and look closely at some of the calculations in the chapter, such as how long it takes for a person of a certain weight or stature to clear the body of alcohol, like the time framing and so forth, because that might be thrown on the exam, or what percentage your blood alcohol control may drop in a specific time frame. You want to look at those carefully. Also, the solution to becoming sober is time. That's almost always on a written exam. And usually they write them out like, what does it take to become sober, or something to that extent. The options would be like a hot shower, coffee, cold shower, time, and time is the answer. Now let's talk about seatbelts and passengers. Seatbelts are another basic subject you need to know, because drivers and passengers are generally required to use seatbelts according to state law. And here's the part that goes beyond simply passing the test. On any exam question, you want to keep this in mind, that a seatbelt is designed to keep you inside the vehicle and help protect you during a crash. So that's a phrase you want to remember as far as any possible question regarding seatbelt laws on your exam. And also, an airbag isn't a replacement for a seatbelt. They're designed to work together. Now let's talk about child passenger laws, because child passenger safety laws can be very specific, and that depends on the child's age, height, weight, and your state laws. A child may need a rear-facing seat, maybe a forward-facing seat, a booster seat, or seat belt. Because these laws vary significantly, don't guess. Check your state's local listings. All right, let's talk about weather and hazardous conditions, because the written test isn't only about perfect weather. It's also going to make sure you understand what you need to do when driving conditions deteriorate, such as rain. Rain reduces traction and visibility, So basically you want to slow down, increase your following distance, turn on your headlights. Typically this might be a question as far as the headlights. The general headlight law is going to be half hour after sunset, half hour before sunrise, or when visibility is reduced by 10 miles, or when atmospheric conditions require the use of windshield wipers. Also watch for standing water, because that can result in hydroplaning. Hydroplaning occurs when your tires lose contact with the roadway because of the water. And if this happens, don't panic. Avoid sudden steering or braking. Just ease off the accelerator and allow the tires to regain traction. Or how about ice and snow? Now, I've always heard the saying, snow means slow. Snow and ice can dramatically increase stopping distance. Your normal following distance may not be enough. You want to slow down and leave yourself additional room. And fog reduces visibility. You want to use the appropriate headlights for the conditions and reduce your speed. If you have fog lights on your vehicle, you want to use those. And remember, you should drive at a speed that allows you to stop within the distance that you can see. And keep in mind, just because you can see, let's say you can see 100 feet ahead of you, doesn't mean it's always going to be 100 feet. You may be reduced down to 20 feet or 5 feet. So always keep that in mind. All right, we're almost done here. What to do in an emergency? Your permit test may ask you about vehicle emergencies. What happens if you have a tire blowout? What happens if your brakes fail? What happens if your vehicle begins to skid? The general principle is stay calm, maintain control, and avoid sudden movements. If something goes wrong, don't make the situation worse by panicking. And whatever possible, get your vehicle to a safe location away from moving traffic. Now, if your vehicle becomes disabled on the roadway, always use your warning devices as required, which are your hazards. Make yourself visible to approaching traffic. Now let's talk about the most important test-taking tip. This is one of the best pieces of advice I can give you before you take your permit test. Read the entire question. Don't rush, because permit tests often include answers that sound reasonable but aren't quite correct. And you also want to watch out for words such as always, never, except, must, may, before, after. One word like that can completely change the meaning of the question. So you want to be reading the questions carefully. Also, don't base your answers on what you see other drivers do, because that's a big mistake. Just because someone else rolls through a stop sign doesn't mean it's legal. And just because someone else speeds doesn't mean the speed limits don't apply. And just because you see somebody holding a phone while driving doesn't make that legal. The written test is testing what you are supposed to do, not what you've seen other people do out on the road. And then let's talk about the numbers you need to study, because one final area deserves special attention. That is numbers. Your written test may ask you about specific distances, speeds, times, ages, or penalties. For example, how far you must park from a fire hydrant, or how far from a railroad crossing you can park, or even with the railroad crossing, how far you must stop from the nearest set of rails, which is usually 15 to 50 feet. That's a common number, so remember that 15 and 50, 15 to 50 feet. It's easy to remember, but it's also pretty easy to slip up on. Also, what's the speed limit in a particular type of area? Maybe if it's not posted, is it 30 in a residential area? Is it 25? Is it 55 on the expressway? Is it 65? Is it 70? And those numbers will vary from state to state, so you do need to memorize those numbers. Or how many feet before a turn you must signal. And we went over that 100 feet in town, 200 feet in the rural areas, and 2 seconds prior to a lane change. What are the restrictions for a driver with a learner's permit? That will vary from state to state. Make sure you focus on that. And if there's some questions that you think you're going to struggle on, I would take notes and write them down. If you need to, go back through this video, rewatch it, and start taking notes if you haven't been taking notes already. And don't assume that a number you've learned from a friend or a different state or an old driver's manual is still correct. Use the current official manual for your state. So final review here. Before you take your learner's permit exam, make sure you understand these major categories. You want to understand the traffic signs and their meanings, traffic signals, right-of-way laws, roadway and lane markings, speed limit and following distances, turning and lane changes, passing, parking restrictions, school buses, emergency vehicles, pedestrians, bicyclists, motorcycles, distracted driving, alcohol and drug impairment, seat belts and child passenger safety laws, driving in inclement weather, and what to do in an emergency. If you understand these concepts and you've studied the specific laws and numbers in your state driver's manual, you'll be much better prepared for that written exam. And keep in mind, to pass the written exam, you need to score an 80%. That is the standard across the board. Now, something else I want you to remember. Passing the permit is not the finish line. It's just the beginning. The written test tells the DMV that you understand the basic rules. The real test begins when you get behind the wheel. And that's when you have to recognize hazards, manage space, communication with other drivers, and make good decisions before a dangerous situation develops. And that's what we're all about here at the Driver Trainer channel. We're not here just to help you pass a test. We're trying to help you become a better driver and understand why these rules exist and how to use that knowledge to avoid collisions. If you're preparing for your learner's permit, take time to study your state's official driver's manual, take practice tests with those questions that are in the book, and don't be afraid to go back and review the areas that you don't understand. And if this video helped you prepare for the test, I want you to consider subscribing to the Driver Trainer channel. And be sure to hit the like button and share this video with as many people as you can, especially your high school buddies that are also going into driver's ed, so they can be prepared for driver's ed as well this fall. And if they're not going to driver's ed quite yet, maybe they're going in the springtime, still share it with them so they can be prepared and give them a few months to prepare as they go to driver's ed in January. And we do have plenty of more videos coming to help you become a safer driver and be more knowledgeable and more comfortable driver. And if you do have any suggestions for future videos, be sure to drop them in the comments. I also have a 5-part defensive driving video series in the playlist on this channel that I would encourage you to watch. These videos will go a few steps beyond your basic driver's education training and will help you be better at defensive driving and identifying potential collisions. So be sure to check out those videos, and I'll post the link in the description down below. So until next time, stay alert, stay focused, and be safe out there. Thank you.